Hey, it's Wendy,
And it's Jess, and you're listening to the Food Heaven podcast.
your online resource for delicious and nutritious living.
Hey guys, you're listening to the Food Heaven podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. This month, we're trying something different. We normally record all of our episodes together, but we decided to try something new and record from across the country. So I am in California, in the Bay Area, and Wendy is in New York City. This month, we are super excited to record this podcast because we are being honored by Unilever. And Unilever is recognizing us as part of their Agents of Change program as dietitians who are passionate about creating healthier, more sustainable futures. So we are absolutely honored to be honored by Unilever, and as part of one of their key pillars of their Agents of Change program, they are focusing on sustainability. And that means making food that's good for the people, the public health, and the planet. And of course, as dietitians and foodies and food lovers, we figured it would be excellent for us to do a podcast on sustainability. So today we're going to talk about our top tips for sustainable living. So stay tuned.
As our podcast sponsors, we wanted to highlight some of the great work that Unilever is doing when it comes to sustainability. If you haven't heard about Unilever before, they're a consumer goods company that makes some of your favorite brands, one of ours being Lipton Tea. In 2010, Unilever launched the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, a 10-year program dedicated to improving health and well-being, reducing environmental impacts, and enhancing livelihoods around the world. For example, Lipton works with the Rainforest Alliance to help provide access to education for families across tea plantations. Through this, sustainable farming practices are ensured that improve quality of life for tea vendors.
So we're just going to jump right in. What exactly is sustainability? I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about sustainability in the news, and the best definition we've found was sustainability essentially means creating and maintaining conditions under which humans and nature can exist in productive harmony. So that means, in my own words, basically making the planet healthy for our generation and future generations to come. I'm sure you guys have all heard about the term going green. That's been popular for the last 5 to 10 years. And there are a lot of different ways that you can go green and be more sustainable. Everything down from the type of air conditioner you use, or the kind of car you drive or don't drive. Those things can all have an effect on the environment. And so sustainability to me means thinking about what's going to leave, the smallest carbon footprint on the environment, and trying to do things in your everyday life to make the environment a healthier place. Now we're going to talk about things that you guys can do to be more sustainable in your everyday life. And we sat down, thought about what sustainability meant to us, and came up with a few take-home messages that we want to leave you guys with. So number one is trying to eat a more plant-based diet. As you probably already know, as vegetarian dietitians, we are huge advocates of plant-based eating for multiple reasons, but one is that plant-based eating is super healthy. We know that it helps to prevent a lot of chronic diseases or reduce your risk for chronic diseases, but it's also really great for the environment. And just in case you needed a refresher, plant-based eating means that you have a diet that includes vegetables, fruits, beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, whole grains. It's not only these foods, but your diet is very inclusive of these foods. Now, what research did we find that supported a plant-based diet for the environment? Well, we found a study in Nature, which is a international science journal, and they basically, looked at a plant-based diet and found that not only would it help to, reduce your incidence of type 2 diabetes by 25%, reduce your rate of cancer by 10%, death from heart disease by 20%, compared to a diet that includes a lot of meat, but it also helps to protect the environment by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, habitat destruction, things like that. So try to eat, plant-based meals whenever possible. We're not saying that you need to be vegetarian by any means, but we're just saying try to make sure that if you have a plate, it includes some plants. Like Our go-to is the My Plate method, which means half of your plate should be vegetables, whether it be salad, broccoli, whatever you want it to be, roasted cauliflower. 1/4 of your plate should be protein, which, if you're a meat eater, that would be like maybe chicken. If pescatarian, you can add fish. Turkey, if you're vegetarian, it could be beans, which are also plant-based. It could be tofu, which is plant-based. And then 1/4 of your plate is your whole grain. So that's things like quinoa, brown rice, whole wheat couscous, stuff like that. So if you're eating a plate like that, whether or not it includes a little bit of meat, that is a very plant-based diet. You can also, try something like a meatless Monday where you don't have meat for that day or for dinner that day. And even that alone can, help when it comes to, being better for the environment. So number one is trying to eat more plant-based.
One of the best ways to eat more sustainably is to eat food that is locally produced. This means that your food doesn't have to travel long distances to get to the supermarket or the grocery store. One common definition of local food is food that's grown within 100 miles of its point of purchase or where you buy it. Two great ways of eating locally are shopping at the local farmers market, which me and Jess do every week, or getting involved in a CSA, a community supported agriculture. And that's something that I typically do during the colder months when the farmers markets close down. A CSA is basically a network of community members who purchase a subscription to a farm box for part of the year. And they basically curate a whole bunch of different fruits and vegetables, whatever's in season, and they pack it up for you in a nice box. And it's typically delivered to you once a week, or you go and pick it up. It's filled with delicious produce from a local farm. And like I said, I've been a member of a CSA. Jess has also done it in California, and we absolutely love it.
Also, we're going to include the link to the site localharvest.org, which is a great resource for finding out where a local CSA or farmers market is in your neighborhood. We love this site. We go to it every time we're traveling to figure out, where's a cool farmers market we could check out. So definitely use that resource. All right, so we talked about eating a more plant-based diet. Wendy also talked about becoming a locavore to be more sustainable, so eating foods that are grown close to you. And I just want to go a little further into the idea of eating less meat. So this is, for our folks who are meat eaters, and we're just going to flesh this out a little bit more. Now, we want to start off by saying that we are, by no means meat haters or meat eater haters, but eating a ton of meat is not ideal for the environment. And just to go a little further into it, well, why is that? And we know that meat production is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And this is specifically true for beef production. So just some things to keep in mind is that we have to remember that raising livestock uses a lot of resources. So let's just think of it. You need food, you need land, you need water, and this takes up a lot more energy than just plants, which is why we emphasize plant-based diet. We definitely think that eating meat can be enjoyed as a part of a healthy diet, but again, just keep in mind to try to limit your meat portion to 1/4 of your plate or less. So I know a lot of our patients, they get anxious when we talk about, taking out a little bit of meat or cutting back on meat a little bit. And one way I try to have them view it is we want to think about meat as more as flavor and not as like the whole meal. I know a ton of people who say, well, it's not a meal if it doesn't have meat on the plate. That's not really true. I know that if you're used to eating meat, it can be hard to envision it not being a meal without meat on the plate, but it's definitely can still be a meal without meat on the plate. And again, you can have meat on the plate, but think of it more in terms of flavor versus like taking up the whole plate. And we also want to make a point that it's important to look at the type of seafood that we're eating because that matters as well. A lot of times, certain species of fish are produced in ways that harm the marine environment, or that species is actually at risk of being overfished. Just like eating local varies from this city to that city, eating sustainable seafood varies from area to area. And if you want to know where the most sustainable seafood options are near you, there's a great website you can check out. It's called seafoodwatch.org. seafood.org. So they break all the different seafood options into three different categories. One is best choices, then they have good alternatives. Say the best choices maybe are too expensive, or you're not able to find them, or you don't like them. There's the good alternatives. And then there's the seafood options to avoid. So this is a great resource to check out and see, are you eating these seafood sources, frequently that are not sustainable? And seafood is super healthy, especially, certain types of fattier fish. So we're not saying don't eat it. We're just saying try to be more mindful of the type of seafood you're eating.
Another thing that's key for us is minimizing food waste. In the United States, food waste is a huge issue. In 2012, Americans ended up wasting nearly 40% of all the food that we produced. Meal planning is something we live by, and it's an excellent way to reduce food waste. Typically, we spend one day a week, usually on Sundays, just 30 minutes creating a meal plan for the following week for what we're going to be eating for our lunches and our dinners. And so after you make this plan, you would then create a grocery list based on the meals that you brainstormed. It might be helpful if you think of three key ingredients that you want to repurpose throughout the week for meals. So for example, like let's say you buy kale, you might want to make a kale salad, or you might want to incorporate that kale into tacos or cook it into a side dish. And make sure you're checking your fridge, your cabinets, so that you don't over purchase foods that you already have. That happens all the time. It's definitely happened to us, and you end up wasting money and creating more food waste. So after you buy your groceries, make sure you store it properly, because that's another big thing where you have all this great food that you buy, and then due to not storing it properly, it goes bad really quickly. So for example, like let's say you're chopping your foods for the week, make sure you're storing them in airtight containers. We'll include a link for resources on how to properly store different types of food in the refrigerator.
Now I want to talk about composting as a way to be more sustainable. When I first moved back to the Bay, I noticed that everybody was composting and I was a little intimidated. I had heard of composting before. I wasn't really doing it in New York, but I knew it was good for the environment. So I decided that I would take it upon myself to just learn a little bit more about it, and how I could compost in an easy way in my tiny apartment in Oakland. And just in case you're not familiar with what exactly is composting, well, compost is made when organic matter, which is food scraps, leaves, or grass clippings, breaks down over time, and you get kind of like a dark dirt-like soil that's usually crumbly and smells like a forest floor. And this is called compost. So when I say organic matter, like I said, it's food scraps, leaves, grass clippings. It's not organic food. So it doesn't mean like you can only compost organic spinach. Like any spinach is compostable. And compost is so cool because it's really rich in nutrients. And what you do is you take this compost and then you put it back into the earth, back into the soil, and it's super healthy for future plants that you're going to grow. And the reason composting is so important is because some statistics say that food and lawn waste makes up 25% of all the waste in landfills, which is like a ridiculous amount of waste. And these materials are natural and they're biodegradable, which means they can actually break down. But keep in mind that they do not break down properly in landfills. And the reason being, we're not going to get too into it, but when it is in a landfill, it's just like too jam packed. There's not enough oxygen. And it can't really decompose properly. So instead, when it decomposes in a landfill, it emits methane gas, which can be toxic to the environment. And it's really important that we try to prevent sending our organic matter to the landfill. So anybody can compost. You don't have to have like a farm or 200 acres to compost. You can compost from a 200 square foot apartment studio, and you can compost and you can make your dent in making the world a better place. There are different ways of composting. There's like more elaborate ways that involve worms and putting a little bit more work in, and then there's simple ways that I do, which is basically just getting a compost bin and then emptying the compost bin into a bigger compost like trash can at the beginning of the week that the city takes kind of with the trash, and then it does the whole compost process itself. So I'll include the link to my compost bin. And I know in a lot of cities, you can probably look up in your city like what exactly your city has to offer. I know in Oakland, composting is really important. So everybody's supposed to compost. And like I said, it's kind of like the trash collection at the end of the week. So they take the compost scraps with the trash. So it makes it really easy for us. But in other cities, like I know in New York, I think the green markets, they can take your compost scraps from you. So just look up, where are compost or like food scrap drop-offs in your neighborhood, and that's the first place to start. And we'll also include some links for if you want to be a little bit more elaborate and compost from like start to finish, and you have your own compost to add back into your garden or your soil. You can do that as well. It's just a little bit more elaborate, but we'll include the links to both of those things. Thank you guys so much for listening to our sustainability podcast. We hope you found some useful tips that you can incorporate into your daily life. And remember, if we all do our part, we can make big changes in making this planet a better place. And we also want to shout out to our podcast sponsor, Unilever. We're so excited to have them honor us as an agent of change and have them be a part of this podcast today.
If you like this episode, make sure you rate, share, and review in iTunes and Stitcher. And we'll catch you next month for another episode. Bye!